The Austrian nobility is a status group in Austria. The nobility was officially abolished in 1919 after the fall of Austria-Hungary. The nobles are still part of Austrian society today, but they no longer retain any specific privileges. Austria's system of nobility was very similar to Germany's system, as both countries were previously part of the Holy Roman Empire. Any noble living in the Habsburg-ruled lands, and who owed their allegiance to the dynasty and therefore to the emperor, was also considered part of the Austrian aristocracy. This applied to any member of the Bohemian, Hungarian, Polish, Croatian, Dalmatian and other nobilities in the Habsburg dominion. Attempting to differentiate between ethnicities can be quite confusing, especially for nobles during the time of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy and Holy Roman Empire, not during the time of the Austrian Empire. A noble from Galicia, for example, could call himself a Polish noble, but he also rightfully belonged to the Austrian nobility. When speaking of Austrian nobility, two categories can be made: 1, the historic nobility that lived in the territories of the Habsburg Empire and who swore allegiance to the dynasty, which included everyone until 1918. 2, the present, post-1918 Austrian nobility, specifically those who today retain Austrian citizenship, whose family originally come from Austria proper, South Tyrol and Burgenland, or who were ennobled at any point under Habsburg rule and identify themselves as belonging to that status group. History: from 1453 onwards, the Archduke of Austria had the right to grant nobility to non-nobles, as did the Archbishop of Salzburg, as Salzburg remained an independent territory. Besides the Holy Roman Emperor from 1438 to 1806 anyway, only a few territorial rulers within the empire had this right. In an era of absolutism, the nobility residing in the cities slowly turned itself into the court nobility. Service at the court became the primary goal of the nobility. This in turn initiated an interest in education and the interests of the court. Within the court, a close inner circle, called the 100 Familien, possessed enormous riches and lands. They also had great influence at the court and thus played an important role in politics and diplomacy. After the end of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, the Habsburg rulers, who were Austrian emperors from 1804 onwards, continued to elevate individuals to nobility until the end of the monarchy in 1918. Some of the noble families even obtained the right to be seated in the Herrenhaus in the Imperial Council of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Nobles from previously sovereign states such as those in northern Italy also had their noble rights confirmed and were allowed to keep their titles. Burgenland, on the former status of nobility in Burgenland, which was part of the Kingdom of Hungary until 1921, see Hungarian nobility. Jewish nobility. A few very wealthy Jewish families were ennobled after the 1782 Edict of Tolerance. Because of the edict, decreed by Emperor Joseph II, very wealthy Jewish bankers, and later entrepreneurs and industrialists, could also be ennobled for their services, but with no title or lower-ranking titles, such as Freiherr or Ritter. The few Jewish families elevated into the aristocracy were not required to forswear their faith, but most of them converted to Christianity in order to become more accepted. Although elevation into the nobility meant recognition for success and civic contributions, and entailed a rise in social status, it did not alter the fact that Jews were, for the most part, still only being tolerated. Jews could not freely choose the place and duration of their stay and had to regularly ask for permission from the authorities. When the banker and protector of arts Raymond Karl Wetzlar von Plankenstein was created a Reichsfreiherr by Empress Maria Theresia, he converted to Catholicism while still young. His mansion in Vienna was a center of the fine arts and he was a close friend of Mozart, as his son Alexander was of Ludwig van Beethoven. Despite these difficulties, by 1821 there were at least 11 ennobled Jewish families living in Vienna alone. Some of the very wealthy included the Rothschilds, Arnstein, Escholz, Gompertz, Kuffner, Lieben, Auspice, Skavonko-Rumler, Totsko, Williamstein, and von Werns families. The elevation into the nobility of wealthy Jews also started the process of assimilation of Jewish families into the Austrian upper class. Abolition of nobility in 1919. The Adel Verfassungsgesetz of 1919 abolished nobility as well as all noble privileges, noble titles and names, but only in Austria. In other monarchies of Europe, the Austrian noble families can wear their noble titles or even particles such as von and zu in his or her name, and they still have the status of nobility there. For example, the name of the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire became simply Karl Habsburg, not Karl von Habsburg, but in Kingdom of Belgium his real name is Archduke Karl of Austria. This may sometimes be confusing, as descendants of nobles are sometimes referred to with noble names abroad. Also, members of noble families often hold multiple citizenships, as was the case for Otto von Habsburg, who was also a citizen of Germany. The Austrian law does not apply to artistic, performer or stage names, where von is sometimes used, as in the case of conductor Herbert von Karajan or the musician Hubert von Goisern. However, stage names are never recognized for official purposes. Members of the lower nobility especially found this radical step of abolition degrading and humiliating, since working towards and finally earning a nobility title was a way for them and their families to rise within society. Members of the higher nobility were able to absorb the formal abolition more easily. They lost their titles and privileges, but kept their social manners, standing and riches. Federal President Michael Hainisch called the official abolition, the law abolishing nobility and titles was never repealed, even during the period of Austro-fascism. Following the Anschluss to Nazi Germany, this law remained on the books, although it was not enforced, allowing Austrian nobles to use titles freely again. Although noble titles and the particles von and zu are not legal anymore, some persons are still unofficially referred to by their titles. For example, Karl Schwarzenberg will occasionally still be referred to as Far One Quarter Rst zu Schwarzenberg in the media. He holds Czech and Swiss citizenship, not Austrian. Unlike the nobility in Bohemia, Poland, Russia, or the former Prussian territories, the Austrian nobility never had its lands and riches confiscated in Austria. Social measures were introduced by the Republican government in order to create more equality amongst the citizens and finance public projects, which put a strain on the traditional land-holding gentry and aristocracy, resulting in the forced sale of many palaces and lands due to the expense of their upkeep. However, there was no measure by the government specifically to target nobility and take away their possessions. To many Austrians, the abolition of nobility, its privileges and titles was and still is an important element of a democratic and republican state, where individuals are treated equally and thus should earn any positions or honors solely through individual merit. Noble titles have been replaced with an almost obsessive usage of and fascination with academic titles and titles of office. Still, the nobility today are sometimes nonetheless treated slightly differently from other citizens. Austrian nobility still plays a large part in movies made after World War II, and is still featured regularly in the media and literature. The social events of nobles are still covered extensively in tabloids. Besides, the law is often broken on occasions when members of the nobility are addressed at various events, at the annual birthday celebration of Emperor Franz Joseph in Bad Ischl, for example, members of the former imperial house of Habsburg, more precisely the family of the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, are addressed as Imperial and Royal Highness. Apart from the prohibition of their titles, most former nobles have fared remarkably well in modern Austria and still make up some of the richest families, such as the Esterházy, Mayer Mellenhof and Mortner Markov. Many members of the Austrian nobility today work in the traditional fields of diplomacy, politics, have business and financial interests, or are philanthropists or socialites. It was estimated that there were about 20,000 Austrian nobles in 2005. That year, an association was founded, the Vereinigung der Edelleute in Österreich, which sees itself as the successor of the Vereinigung katholischer Edelleute in Österreich, founded in 1922 but banned under the Nazis in 1938. Until recently, all of the various attempts at revival were blocked by Austrian authorities. Noble titles. Austria's nobility was divided into two categories, the higher nobility, and the lower nobility. To the higher nobility belong the princes and counts, and to the lower nobility belong the barons, knights and untitled noble families, Non-ruling member of the imperial family. Non-ruling members of the imperial family were given the title of, the wife of the emperor bore the title of empress and was styled Her Imperial Majesty. Archduke, Archduchess and styled Imperial and Royal Highness. Agnates of the imperial family, who were excluded from the line of succession, were created dukes and duchesses or princes and princess and addressed as Highness or Serene Highness. Duke, Duchess, higher nobility titles, English titles with German equivalents, Prince, Princess, Count, Countess. One for a countess not being married. The title Comtesse was used, borrowed from the French language comtesse. Lower nobility titles, English titles with German equivalents, Baron, Baroness. 2, Knight, Edler, Edel. 2 in German, a distinction between baronesses exists, a Frau being a baroness by marriage and Freiin being a baroness by birth. The title of knight is equivalent to baronet, that is hereditary knight, and Edler means noble. Below is an incomplete list of Austrian noble families, listed by rank of title. Note that some members of a family were sometimes given higher titles by the emperor because of merit. Titles, styles, and rights could only be conferred by the monarch. In some cases, they could even be revoked because of fall from favor. The imperial family, Erzherzog Erzherzogin, of Austria-Est, Großherzog Großherzogin, of Tuscany, Herzog-Herzogin, of Babenberg extinct 1246, of Hohenberg, of Modena and Est, of Reichstadt, of Teschen, the nobility. Because of the abolition of the prepositions, many families were forced to reinvent their family names completely. This brought in many complications. The following list of the non-Habsburg nobles shows the pre-1919 family names or preposition in brackets, followed by the standard appearance today. Noble families could have the preposition von, zu, or a combination of it. Non-German-speaking nobility, however, preferred to use der, such as those in Bohemia, Hungary, and Galicia, as they felt that it was less Germanic-sounding. Since Austria-Hungary was a multi-ethnic empire, both versions could be officially used and were recognized by the government. Conversely, family names using prepositions like de and de la could not replace the preposition with the Germanic von. For example, the family Sanchez de la Cerda originally came from Spain, therefore the preposition remained as in the original. The same exception applies to other families such as Paragraph Nburg de la Zerna, and de la Fontaine Undana Nortunverzog. The latter is an interesting combination of French and German language prepositions, which again is a reflection of the colorful multi-ethnic history of the Austrian Empire. Often, family names with a predicate were written von xy, even though the correct form is x von y. Far 1/4 RST Far 1/4 RSTIN. The style of address is der Klaugt. Also used was Far 1/4 Naden. The Austrian princely title was the most prestigious title of the Austrian nobility, forming the higher nobility alongside the counts. This close inner circle, called the 100 Familien, possessed enormous riches and lands. They also had great influence at the court and thus played an important role in politics and diplomacy. Today, the fortunes of the Austrian princely families remain among the biggest fortunes of the country. Graf Gra currency Fin. The style of address is, in most cases, Elaugt. Also used was Gra currency Fleischnaden. Freiherr Fruin. There was no official style, but Na currency Digger Herr, Na currency Deitsch Frau, or Na currency Diggs Frau currency Uline were common forms of address. Although strictly speaking the title was Freiherr, the usage of Baron in written and verbal communication was very common, even if incorrect. The title Freiin was also often replaced for Geboren Baronin, which was strictly speaking also incorrect since a Baronin would have been wed already. Ritter, there was no official style, but Na currency Digger Herr was a common form of address. The title was for males only. No female version exists. Female members of a family with the title Ritter however were often addressed as Edel von, which was totally incorrect, unless the family already carried the Edler honor before being raised as into the Ritter class. Edler Edel, the rank of Edler carried no official style, but Na currency Digger Herr, or Na currency Deitsch Frau were common forms of address. Erbse currency LZER. This title belonged to the patricians of the Free City of Werl, in Germany, who had the hereditary right to exploit the nearby salt mines. Thus this title was not granted in Austria, but merely recognized there. Von, Lillen, von, Papen, entitled noble families or status unknown. Marquis, Ghuzni ds Giorgio, see also, Bohemian nobility, German comital titles, Hungarian nobility, notes. References. Literature, Binder Kegelstein, Reinhard. Österreichisches Adelsrecht 1868 Euro 1918/19, von der Oststaltung des Adelsrechts der Slawischen Reiche Currency LFTE bis zum Adelsaufhebungsgesetz der Republik unter besonderer Beere Kortexeitigung des adeligen Namensrechts. Frankfurt am Main, UA. Peter Lang. ISBN A978-3-631-34833-8, Coudenhove-Kalergi, Richard. Adel. Vienna. 1923. Frank dar Paragraph-Fering, Peter. Edesche Lexikon des Paragraphsstreichischen Kaneiserkums 1804 Euro 1918. Herder, Vienna 1989. ISBN 3-210-24925-3. Lieven, Dominic. The Aristocracy in Europe, 1815 Euro 1914. New York, Columbia University Press. ISBN A0-231-08112-XA. Seijert, Heinz. Adel in Österreich, in German. Vienna 1971. Stekl, Hans. Adel und Bar 1/4 in der Habsburg-Monarchy 18-20. Jahrhundert, in German. Oldenburg, Vienna 2004. ISBN 3-486-56846-9, Walter Skirken, Gudula. Bloßblut Fahr 1/4 Österreich. Amalthea, Vienna 2000. ISBN 3-85002-452-0, Walter Skirken, Gudula. Der Verborgenstand. Adel in Österreich Hute. Amalthea, Vienna 2007. ISBN 3-85002-428-8, Der Gotha. Supplement. Der Österreich Gotha. Mit Currenzienzugswerken zum Deutschen Adel. Sauer, Munich 1997. ISBN 3-598-30359-9, external links, Vereinigung der Edelleute Österreich homepage of the Association of Austrian Nobles, Österreichisches Familienregister database of all Austrian noble families, Tiroler Adler database of all Tyrolean noble families, Stiftungslexikon Adel online encyclopedia about nobility in Austria, Heraldische Genealogische Gesellschaft Adler Wien homepage of Heraldic Genealogy Society Eagle in Vienna.